So I'm going to read some of the things from the journal that I've been writing in. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. To trace the words back to the beginning, it starts with God. God puts a path in front of us and gives us a choice to care or not to care, to show concern for the well-being of others. We do this by watching our self-talk. The way we talk to ourselves is how we speak to others. Man is an animal. Man has a mind which connects to his mentality. Man has a spirit. Man is an animal. Well, this is writings from observations of the body. Man is an animal. At 6:13 a.m., I smoked one bowl. Focusing on my breath, I got the feeling to slow down. The idea to me of conscious evolution is conscious involution. We have sheaths of consciousness, sheaths of matter, protoplasm. So here is my story. Well, first, man is an animal, which connects us to our animal nature. The hierarchy of biological classifications. Eight major taxonomic ranks. We have life, then domain, then kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And now on to my story. We all come from one consciousness. When we are born, our mind is somewhat like a blank slate. We learn from watching or observing other people. We get this feeling that we can do what others do by copying or imitating their actions. I feel like the first time I became aware or conscious, I put on headphones and there was music playing. Then there was all this energy and a big rush of wind and then a loud crash and a bang, and I fell from somewhere. Since I had all this energy in me, I didn't know what to do with it. So I started to shake my head back and forth. And every night when I would go to sleep, I would put in music and then shake my head back and forth because it would tire me out. And I couldn't control how I felt on the inside, or I couldn't control how I felt on the outside, but I could control how I felt on the inside. We lived with this lady. I believed I called her Aunt Faye. Then we moved in with my grandma. They got me a dog named Shamal. Me and my cousin used to play with Shamal in the backyard for hours. I love that dog. It was so cool. It was a toy poodle. Then we moved next door to my grandma. We didn't live there for very long. The rent kept going up, and so we moved to Sonterra, an apartment. From these apartments, I started to go to school. I was sick a lot as a child. I had asthma, so I had to take albuterol breathing treatments like every 2 hours. We lived in the apartments for about a year. Then we moved into a hotel. We lived there for a few weeks because we got evicted from Sonterra. Then we moved into Highway 10, an apartment. We lived there for about a year and a half. Then we moved to Oakwood. Lived there for about a year and a half. Then we moved into Yorkshire. Then we moved to Summerfields. And then from there we moved to the house we have today. We moved 10 times from the time I was born to the time I was 7. I wrote this part while I was intoxicated. From the time I was 7 until about 12 or 13, I was fascinated by what weed was. I wasn't fixated on it, but I was curious as to why my dad thought it was so special that he would give up his, in quotations, happiness. The feeling of being addicted is a real mind twister. You hate on the experience the whole time you do it, while feeling justified and pity for your own state of consciousness. Creating this duality of feeling in mind where you feel against yourself. My dad tells me it's being okay and accepting yourself for who you are. And having a loving attitude towards yourself. I think your struggles. Having a loving attitude to the things we find difficult. And now I'm no longer intoxicated. Moving around so much made it difficult for me to feel at home. We were pretty much always getting evicted from being behind on rent. Growing up and watching my parents, they would do weird stuff, like lock themselves in the bathroom. And this always confused me. Like, why are you both in there with the door closed? I would go to school, and other children's parents seemed more happier, more involved in their child's life. This always made me feel bad, so I hated going to school. Made me always feel like everyone was judging me. Plus, my mind was being mean to me, telling me stuff like, those people don't like you. They don't really want to be your friend. They really hate you. It was pretty easy for me to make friends. I would go on walks around my apartment and run into other kids. Usually girls. I got along with people pretty well. I learned it's about being interested in them as a person. Plus, moving all the time, I was having to meet new people. Since my mind was being mean to me, saying stuff like, those people don't want to be your friend, it was always hard for me to like myself. When I would make friends, I would tell them stuff about myself. People would always amaze me when they would tell me they liked the things I liked, which made me like myself more. I found it interesting that everyone was kind of like you. We lived in the apartments, Summerfield, when the police got involved. I mean, it feels like they were always involved. I remember when we lived off of Highway 10, and 3 of my friends called the police from a payphone at the apartments to see if it would work. And it did. They walked up to us and asked if we had called the police. I didn't want to lie, so I confessed. And they ended up telling us that we shouldn't call the police if we don't need them, like if we don't really need them, because in reality they could be somewhere else saving someone in danger. And then they gave us a sticker, which was really cool. Okay, so back to Summerfield. I would ride my skateboard or walk to school with my friends, and on my way home, I would stop by the office to get chocolate chip cookies. This is one thing I really enjoyed as a child. In these apartments one night, CPS and 2 police officers came and knocked at the door at 7 p.m. Usually my parents would hide from the police when they came to the door. They opened the door and it was 2 police officers and a woman. She asked to speak to them outside. And then they had me go back inside. She asked me to go outside, and she told me that my parents had traffic tickets, which came to be warrants. And she told me that they were going to jail to take care of those and to turn in clean UAs to show that they were getting clean. She told me that I was going to foster care and that my sister would be going to a foster care for special needs and that my parents would be going to jail. She then let me go say goodbye to my mom and dad. I hugged and kissed them, both, goodbye, and then they said they were going to do what it took to get me back. They promised me. Then my dad told me to remember there was always God, and to look to that when you feel lost. We were always having deep talks about suffering, because I always hated how I felt as a child. I hated my whole existence as a child, and it always made me feel bad because I hated everything. I always hated how I felt. Life just was really really shitty then. Then I told him I love you, and off I went with the CPS lady. It took us what seemed like an hour or two to arrive at the foster care home. I had arrived, and it was probably 10 p.m. We walked up to the house, and the CPS lady called them, and as we walked up, it opened the door, and the foster mom greeted us and escorted us into the house. And standing in the living room was the dad, the mom, and their kids, which she introduced so it felt comfortable because it was kind of like my home, but the only difference was they were an African American family. And me being a child, the only dark people I'd ever really interacted with was the ones that my parents were getting their crack from. So I blamed the color rather than the action. And I had a self bias towards black people, and I blamed those people for what was happening in my life. My dad was always trying to get me to understand it's because of racism, being hateful towards another group because of their skin. He told me that in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I think some of the 60s, America was segregated. But as I experienced this family, they got me to understand that people outside your own family will treat you like family. They'll say stuff to hurt your feelings. They'll make fun of what you do or tell you it's stupid. Really, what I mean by that is I used to make my periods really big. I always wanted to be an artist, and one time my dad made fun of a hand turkey that I'd made, and he said that it looked like a deformed dog or something, and it hurt my feelings. It crushed my spirit because it made me feel like that I couldn't be artistic. And so I would draw my periods really big on my paper because it was kind of like art. And the foster dad there told me that it was stupid and that I needed to stop doing it. And but his daughter, she liked it, so it inspired me to keep trying. When I was staying there, I used to love honey buns. They're like a little cinnamon roll, but on the go. I really enjoyed these. They felt like home. When I would go to school, this always made me feel like an outcast. Side note, have you ever heard of them? The band Outcast? Check them out. But I would be this little white boy getting out of the car with two people who didn't look like me. School felt humiliating for me all the time. I had this teacher who was kind of mean. She was a math teacher, and I didn't really understand math. No matter how hard I tried, it just didn't make any sense. And one time, I had to go to the bathroom, and she wouldn't let me go. And I really had to go. And I don't like going against authority. So I asked again, and she told me no. So I felt like I had no choice. Being in an odd place and around people I didn't know, I didn't like going against authority. And so I felt utterly despair and felt like that I had to pee on myself. And honestly, that was a humiliating experience because there was a puddle by my chair, and then the nurse had to come down and escort me to the office, and then they gave me a change of clothes, and the foster mom came and picked me up and took me home. But that night, I did something that I had never done before. I got on my knees next to my bed, and I prayed to God that He would let me get to go home and see my parents. And that Friday, it was like a Wednesday that I had peed on myself. And that Friday, I literally got an early dismissal at like 12, and I got to go home. Well, rather, that Friday I was getting an early dismissal from school. The foster mom had come to pick me up. She told me that I would wait at her house for the lady from CPS, that she would take me to a place that I could see my parents. And then after I spent a few minutes with them, I was brought to my grandma's house where I could spend the next 7 or 8 months at my grandma's house while my parents were turning in clean UAs. My mom got an inheritance for $100,000 because her dad had passed, and that gave them a chance to buy 2 new cars and put a down payment on the house we have today. That was the first 7 years of my life. And in that, it was quite a struggle because I always wanted my parents' love, but because they were addicted to drugs, it always felt like that they didn't love me. And in reality, like, I knew that they loved me, but they were always preoccupied with some bullshit and chasing after a high. And in reality, like, if you're gonna live your whole life searching after a high, then you're gonna miss the best moments of your life. Because in reality, that's what life is about, making the best moments for yourself. And yeah, so that was my story so far. That was the first 7 years of my life. My eye, it happened whenever I was 17. And we'll get there. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed.